The subject is the state of electronic invoicing in the United States, and my guest is Louis Rossi. He is Director of Business Development with Comark. Louis, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's explain for me, it's my understanding that other countries are outpacing the United States in the adoption of e-invoicing. Is that the case, and if so, why?
Yeah, it definitely is the case. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest factors in the idea of them outpacing us is that they have a formatted structure for exchanging different invoices. And so this helps with the adoption because there's a framework in place, and these companies can connect to these frameworks and standardize their languages, and it's much more efficient and cost saving for them to do so. Another main reason for this is also that a lot of other countries have mandates, e-invoicing mandates to go digital, and that is not the case here in the U.S. And so if the government is telling you have to do it, and there's penalties for not doing it, then obviously the adoption is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
One of the bigger reasons why there's such a lower adoption rate here in the U.S. is that we have a lot of small businesses. About 90% of all of our businesses are small businesses. And because of this, they don't have the scale of invoices to justify the investment in the infrastructure, especially without a standardized framework. So what ends up happening is they don't fully understand the benefits, and they also don't fully see the cost savings because the scale is really not there for them.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those benefits in a moment, but I just want to drill down a little bit more. You say there is no standard structure for invoice exchange in the United States. I mean, I thought EDI was one means of doing that. I thought there were some templates that would standardize it, but not so much the case as I thought.
Yeah, I mean, there's EDI, but there's nothing there's nothing quite like PEPL in Europe, where it's this really standardized framework and network for different service providers that come together. And so if we're looking at the U.S., a lot of U.S. companies are still using PDFs as a popular way because it's something that they're familiar with. When we get into like a three-corner model, where both the supplier and buyer are using the same service providers, they can use EDI or some sort of an e-invoicing service provider. But when if they want to go into the four-corner model, which is the most effective and they see the most benefit, that's when they're both using, the buyer and the supplier are using separate service providers, and that's where the lack of the interoperability and standardized networks and frameworks, such as the PEPL in Europe, as well as this is something that the Business Payment Coalition is working on to get such a framework to standardize this process. Where service providers can link up and better optimize the process.
Still, I have to confess that I'm a little bit surprised that it hasn't come along further than this, with all the talk of digital and automation going on with document exchange for years now. What is the selling point? What is the benefit of transferring to a e-invoicing environment?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is the reduction of operation costs, right? Because you're going to eliminate paper. You're reducing your human effort needed for workflow processing, which is directly translate to, more cost-effective processing. We're optimizing cash management, and this is done so by speeding up the workflows, which allows the payers to access those early payment discounts, but it also allows the payees to provide the invoices faster, which leads to the improved cash flow and working capital. Mm-hmm. Another benefit is to minimize risk. The risks associated with human errors, such as overpayments, duplicate payments, and fraudulent activities. E-invoicing improves real-time view and traceability of all the documents, so that people can go back and look backwards in terms of any kind of fraud or any potential person who is repetitively holding up the process. But it also involves this real-time view where people can get a quick snapshot and see right away, who's it on and what the holdup is. It increases the data quality and accuracy of the information and access to critical information. And it does this by reducing the manual inputting of the information. Whenever you are able to automate a process and it's information from X box is automatically going into Y box, then there's less room for error and less fingers and for a mistake. Right?
Well, it certainly seems like a no-brainer for both parties, but especially for the seller of a product or services. I would think it would mean they get paid more efficiently and faster. Is that the case, that maybe a seller is more wanting to push for this type of automation than the buyer, or does the drawbacks, the pushback come from both sides?
Yeah, I think if pushback comes back from both sides, I think both sides see more of a benefit, but a lot of the benefits mainly are on the supplier side, and buyers are definitely more keen to move forward towards automation.
Yeah. Is there big investment involved? Is that a disincentive, or are companies afraid that they're going to have to spend a lot of time and money on implementing something like this?
Well, I think it depends on the size of the business, right? For businesses in the U.S., roughly 2/3 are still emailing digital invoices, and less than 20% are actually structured. The biggest, when you want to talk about cost and investment in infrastructure, I think the larger companies are seeing a much more, return on investment, direct cost savings
Hmm.
quickly, and efficiencies with less errors. And fraud is a really big problem. And 5% of all revenue is can be lost by fraud across the board. And so the larger scale your business is, that 5% can mean $1 million, $10 million, $20 million. And so I think the biggest piece for the adoption rate is that 90% of all of our businesses in the U.S. are small businesses, and they don't necessarily have the funds to implement such infrastructure, and they
Hmm.
also don't really see the benefit because their scale is such at a smaller rate that they're not going to see that immediate cost bottom line as much as a large business would, which I
I,
believe with this larger business is more, you
on the
know.
other hand, I would think that if you, let's say you're a small supplier to a big box retailer like a Walmart or something like that, you may be compelled by that buyer to switch over to e-invoicing. Does that happen? Does that help to move the small companies in that direction?
It does, but it's more of a one-off at that point. It doesn't become part of their culture. It becomes part of like a reaction to business.
Hmm.
It's not ingrained in small businesses to adopt such automated e-invoicing solutions. It's they will if they have to, and especially like you had mentioned Walmart. Walmart's one of those reasons to get off their couch, and invest, because that the return on investment is going to be there. But those are more of like a one-off basis.
Yeah. Are there concerns about security at all, or at least maybe justified or otherwise?
Security in the exchange of data.
Well, it's in the protecting the data that flows between buyer and seller in the form of an electronic invoice. Does anyone worry, again, whether or not with justification, that it might not be a secure transaction, that it might be available to non-authorized eyes? I'm just wondering if that might be one of the reasons for their one of the reasons for their not wanting to do that.
Yeah, I think for smaller businesses, it's personal habit. It's the
Yeah.
it's the way that they've always done business. It's the way, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't believe that they see as much of, I mean, sending in a PDF email runs particular risks as well, and so they're willing to do that, but they're just more familiar with that. And a lot of small businesses are just based on their habits and what they're comfortable with. And I think a full structured approach for them is something that's it's
Hmm.
very, I guess it would be very intimidating for them, and plus the investment. But I think from a security standpoint, I think the risk and security is more, mainly probably more concerned about fraud than they are concerned about
Right.
the
Right.
security of information.
And despite all of these drawbacks or pushbacks that we've been talking about, I assume that there is a trend, is there not, a steady trend toward the adoption of e-invoicing? As slow as it might be, it is happening, right, on a wider scale?
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think you made a good point before when you brought up the Walmart. I think for a lot of these small businesses, if they want to do business, within the digital trade, they're going to have a lot more of these one-off connections where, they see it's not as intimidating as they thought. There are a lot of benefits, and instead of it just being a one-off, I think the culture is starting to grab as a lot of these smaller businesses start to invest and see opportunity in digital trade. They're also seeing the benefits of e-invoicing, which I think is leading to a different culture, so to speak.
Well, it seems like companies have been dragged kicking and screaming into so many aspects of technological transition
Yeah,
that this is just one more that's going to happen. It's just a question of when.
exactly.
Lewis, I want to turn the discussion to talk a little bit about Comark specifically. First of all, just give me a brief capsule description of Comark and what it offers the marketplace.
Yeah, so Comark is an IT, it's a software house. We have about 6,500 people. We operate in lots of different sectors, and e-invoicing, EDI, OCR, these are all products within some of our sectors. And, we really try to automate processes for companies to help them with their business goals. And, we talk a little bit about, how COVID has had an impact on the financial stability of a lot of companies, and it's also changing, how and where companies process and do their business, right? And so what Comark really does is helps kind of automate and use technology so that not only in a period of pandemic, so to speak, or lockdown, that businesses can have a better business continuity through technology, but they do this outside of these types of situations, helping companies automate their processes, reduce their frauds. Tax alignment is a huge one. A lot of these companies operate on global scales. Well, Comark has entire teams of lawyers who are dedicated to just understanding the tax laws so that when we're helping them implement their solutions for any product, e-invoicing in particular in this case, that we understand all the different regulations, the local regulations and tax regulations, and how to appropriately do business. And so Comark just really wants to help businesses thrive through the utilization of technology, and staying on the forefront and, listening to the trends and listening to their clients and adapting, our processes and our technology to better suit, business needs so that ultimately everybody, can be more profitable and more efficient and safer.
And maybe this is a good time to be switching over to that level of automation. If companies don't have that much business to worry about, if their attention is not being placed elsewhere, maybe this is a good time to focus in on something like that with long-term benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, a lot of companies were, really hesitant. They started to kind of see, a little bit of their bottom line impacted. But I also do believe that now it's time to reduce your operational costs, right? If you want to keep your machine, it's always better if you have to feed it less. And I know there is an initial investment in technology in the beginning, but it often pays for itself pretty quickly, and it allows businesses to run a leaner machine, so to speak, so that when something like this does happen, their operational costs, don't eat them alive, so to speak.
Good point. Well, Louis Rossi of Comark, thank you so much for helping us to understand what's going on in the world of e-invoicing and a little bit about the role that Comark itself is playing in that. Thanks very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.